Hello again, rail fans, and welcome to part 2 of our Illinois trip. As you saw in the previous video that I made covering this trip, BuckeyeNationRailroader and I spent the entire day at Galesburg, Illinois watching the trains go by. And now, it's time to see the trains that we saw in Rochelle, Illinois. Rochelle, Illinois is home to a well-known rail park in the city, the Rochelle Railroad Park. This is, to my knowledge, one of the first true rail parks that was ever made in the United States, as this park opened back in 1998. It is also believed that this rail park created inspiration for other cities across the country to make rail parks of their own, like the Iron Triangle Rail Park in Fostoria, Ohio, for example. The rail park is also the location of a diamond between two subdivisions, the Union Pacific Geneva subdivision and the BNSF Aurora subdivision. The second half of our trip began just as quickly as the first half came to an end on June 18, 2022. After making the 2-hour drive between Galesburg and Rochelle, I wanted to check out the rail park for a little bit before we had to check into the hotel and get our sleep in for tonight. As we were pulling into the parking lot, I noticed one of the signals on UP's Geneva subdivision went green, meaning that a train was not too far from the rail park. Soon enough, the train given the green signal then raced by the rail park, which was a westbound Union Pacific intermodal train on the Geneva subdivision. This Union Pacific intermodal train had a special locomotive trailing second. As you just saw, in trail on this Union Pacific intermodal train was UP 6904, an original GE AC 6000 CW. After the westbound intermodal train cleared, an eastbound intermodal train rounded the corner and crossed the diamonds on the Union Pacific Geneva subdivision, as it was leaving Global 3 Yard, which is just around the corner from the rail park. As you're seeing right now, this eastbound intermodal train also had a special locomotive on it as well, which was Union Pacific 1726, an original EMD SD40-2. were leaving the rail park, BNSF surprised us by sending a westbound grain train across the diamonds on the Aurora subdivision. After the BNSF grain train cleared, we then had to leave the rail park to go check into our hotel and to get our sleep in for tonight. But don't worry, there's plenty of more action to see tomorrow. So let's fast forward to the next day at the snap of my fingers, shall we? Well, folks, I guess we didn't have to leave the hotel to see a train because there's one right across the highway from us. Welcome to the next day, rail fans. The date is June 19th, 2022. Our goal today was to spend the entire day at the Rochelle Railroad Park watching the trains go by. Once again, considering how busy that this place is, I will only be narrating the trains where I feel is necessary, so without further ado, let's get started. We began the day at the Rochelle Railroad Park with a Union Pacific westbound local freight train on the Geneva subdivision, heading for Global 3 Yard. This local train had a pair of SD70Ms on point and a short train of autoracks behind them. As you're seeing here, I moved down to the crossing for this catch of a westbound Union Pacific ethanol train on the Geneva subdivision, with a pair of Norfolk Southern locomotives on point. After the ethanol train went by, we then see a westbound Union Pacific coal train on the Geneva subdivision, specifically an empty one. Serving as an N-train DPU on this empty coal train was a locomotive that I wanted to see during this leg of the trip. A rebuilt GE AC6000CW, which is now classified as a C44 ACM. After all of the Union Pacific trains, we finally see a BNSF train on the Aurora subdivision, which was a power move heading east to go get a sand train to bring back west. With a pair of BNSF SD40-2s, a BNSF ES44C4, a Norfolk Southern ES44AC, and a BNSF C44-9W. After finally switching to my camera, we then see a westbound BNSF intermodal train on the Aurora subdivision. Serving as an end-train DPU on this intermodal train was our 6th BNSF Heritage 1 C44-9W. Sometime after lunch, we then see the power move that we saw earlier on the head of a westbound sand train as it was meeting an eastbound intermodal train.
second locomotive is running at a higher RPM. I remember you mentioned it to me. You go, I like talking to you. I like hanging out with you because you know your shit. Well, I noticed that some of these hoppers are older. Cold train, heavy cold train. In the middle of the train right here, they have no locomotive. That locomotive right there is the one that's really hot. Right here. You hear that? Oh, look at that. These are taller. Oh, just one. Usually they have two at the end. But I guess that's because they have four locomotives in the middle of the That one's also straight. That one's also
After the eastbound BNSF mixed freight train cleared, we then saw a westbound Union Pacific mixed freight train on the Geneva subdivision. When I took this picture, he pulled up to the signals protecting the diamonds, but then came to a stop, which left a good 5 minutes of us wondering why he was doing so. The answer soon became clear by the time this westbound BNSF mixed freight train rounded the corner on the Aurora subdivision. After the BNSF mixed freight train crossed the diamonds, the signals for this train went from red to yellow, which meant that dispatch was turning him loose.
Probably has a bunch of them in his cab. Probably.
Well, yeah, but he's not. He's
Yeah.
not supposed to throw these out.
Can I use some of your sunscreen? That's okay.
Oh yeah. Anthony, good idea. Let's take that to the club. Let's take that to the club next Thursday.
Okay guys, I'm not sure if you saw this on the clip, but the conductor aboard this train here threw out a bunch of these incident report packages from the locomotive, so it was a nice gesture, but I'm not sure if it was supposed to be done, but it happened, and I'm making this clip to prove that it did. After the westbound Union Pacific mixed freight train disappeared around the corner into Global 3 Yard, we then see an eastbound Union Pacific mixed freight train coming out of Global 3 Yard and onto the Geneva subdivision. As you just saw, this Union Pacific mixed freight train was equipped with a nice lash-up, with two SD70Ms, an SD70AH, an SD40N, and an ES44AC.
They're steaming hard. Now see the engine in the front right here, that's about a 30-year-old locomotive. 40 or is it 30? Yeah, 30 years old. What behind it is that? Yeah, this one is up.
another load of containers and trailers are making their way westbound on BNSF's Aurora subdivision. I just barely got my phone recording in time to see the locomotives go by, and I'm glad that I did because of the Ferromex SD70 Ace trailing second. I decided to go down to the railroad crossing one last time to catch this westbound Union Pacific mixed freight train on the Geneva subdivision, with a special locomotive trailing second. A rebuilt former Southern Pacific GP40-2 was seen trailing second on this Union Pacific mixed freight train. With the sun barely in the sky in the background, we then saw our final train of the day, which was an eastbound Union Pacific mixed freight train coming out of Global 3 Yard and onto the Geneva subdivision. Tucked in behind the locomotives and the few freight cars behind them were a large cut of flat cars with John Deere farming tractors on them.
GATX, what's that? No idea. Yeah, that's new. That's new. It looks. Wow, all that freight on 2 locomotives.
With darkening skies above us after that mixed freight train made its way through Rochelle, we then had to go back to the hotel and get our sleep in for tonight. Traffic through the area was slow to get going, but in the end, it turned out to be not so bad and it had some decent results. Even though we had to leave Rochelle, there's still one more place that we needed to go to before we left Illinois and headed back for Columbus, Ohio, which we'll get to right now. We were once again out trackside the next day on June 20th, 2022, and we are located in West Chicago, Illinois. At this one railroad crossing here in town, it is home to an interlocking tower and a triple diamond, where the Union Pacific's Geneva subdivision and the Canadian National's Lathton subdivision cross over each other. We only had an hour to stay in West Chicago because we still had the 6-hour drive ahead of us back to Columbus, Ohio. However, the hour that we did spend here did not disappoint. Shortly after we got here, we got to see a southbound Canadian National rock train on the Lathton subdivision passing the interlocking tower. As the train crosses the diamonds, listen to the rhythm of the diamonds and you'll see why we came here. We would later find out that this rock train had an N-train DPU, which was CN ES44AC 3878, with the 100th anniversary logos on the side. After the Canadian National rock train cleared, we then got to see an eastbound Union Pacific mixed freight train crossing the diamonds on the Geneva subdivision. As I was filming this mixed freight train, I was reminded of the dangers of rail fanning in multi-track territory, in the worst way possible.
Well, folks, that was a little too close for comfort.
A westbound intermodal train snuck up behind me on the Geneva subdivision, giving us no warning of its approach on the crossing. Considering there was only a good 5 to 10 feet between me and the train, it definitely was too close for comfort. After nearly having a heart attack, I decided to move across the Lathton subdivision and across the road to the other side of the diamonds. Here we're about to witness a meet between an eastbound Metra commuter train and a westbound Union Pacific mixed freight train on the Geneva subdivision. Both trains in this meet had some pretty interesting aspects about them. First, the Metro commuter train had an F40PH pushing with the Operation Lifesaver graphics on the side. The Union Pacific train had a mixture of foreign power from Kansas City Southern and Norfolk Southern. However, the KCS in the lead quickly drew my attention to it, and that was the only picture that I got on this mixed freight train. A little while later, Buckeye Nation Railroader gave me the heads up of a northbound train on Canadian National's Lathton subdivision. With that knowledge in mind, I then moved across the road in preparation for the passage of the CN train. However, the crossing gates on Union Pacific's Geneva subdivision went down instead. After wondering what train it was for, I realized it was for another Metro commuter train coming out of Chicago, with a special locomotive in the lead. Assigned to take this commuter train today was Metra 87, an EMD F59 PHI, which was built in 1998 for Amtrak as 464. 464 spent many years in California pulling Amtrak's Pacific Surfliner trains. The careers of Amtrak's F59 PHIs on the Pacific Surfliner as well as the Cascades came to an end in 2018 when 22 Siemens SE44 Chargers took their place. However, the F59 PHIs would find a second career here in Chicago when they were sold to Metra in 2018 as well. Once under ownership of Metra, 464 was renumbered to 87 and it was given a fresh repaint of its current Surfliner paint scheme. Now, the reason why seeing this F59 PHI was so special to me was because of the fact that the F59 PHIs are my favorite passenger diesels of all time. Why, you may ask? Let's just say that model railroading had 100% of the influence on that. After the F59 PHI took its passenger train across the Diamonds, Canadian National turned loose the northbound train that was waiting on the Lathton subdivision for the Metro train to come across. As it would turn out, the northbound in question was an intermodal train. As per typical, there was one more train to see as we were leaving. As we were crossing the Geneva subdivision to leave West Chicago, we noticed another metro train approaching the crossing, so we turned around to go see it. This metro train had a longer consist and 2 F40PHs on point. After the Metro commuter train made its way across the crossing, we then had to get back on the road for the long 6-hour drive back to Columbus. I'm just gonna say that this was hands down a fantastic trip. We were able to visit 4 locations here in the great state of Illinois, and we got to see a ton of good trains along the way. I would also like to give a big shout out to Buckeye Nation Railroader and his dad for taking me out here, because if it wasn't for them, there would have been no way that this trip would have been possible. Leave a like and or a comment down below to share your thoughts on the video. If you enjoy the content that I produce, consider subscribing to my YouTube channel and tapping the bell button to be notified when a new video gets posted. Anyways, that's all for now. This is All Ohio Rail Fan, signing off.